From a lead actor whose voice was mysteriously replaced to a producer who thought Queen was too campy, Flash Gordon's production was wilder than anything on planet Mongo. With directors like Fellini and Leone walking away, costumes held together by duct tape, and a star who disappeared before filming ended, this cult classic hides secrets stranger than Ming's most diabolical schemes. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Flash Gordon. Sam Jones's voice mystery. When you watch Flash Gordon today, you're hearing one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. Most of the dialogue coming out of star Sam J. Jones's mouth isn't actually his voice at all, but rather the work of a professional voice actor whose identity remained a secret for decades. The story begins with the intense personality clash between Jones and producer Dino De Laurentiis during the chaotic production of 1980. Jones, a former Marine and rising television actor, had landed the lead role after De Laurentiis' mother-in-law spotted him on a dating game show. But what started as a dream job quickly turned into a nightmare of conflicts and misunderstandings. The disputes between Jones and De Laurentiis escalated throughout filming, with the young actor feeling increasingly frustrated by the producer's vision for the character. When it came time for post-production work, Jones made a decision that would haunt the film forever. He refused to return for the crucial ADR sessions, where actors re-record their dialogue to match the final edit. This left the production in a devastating position, with their leading man's voice missing from large portions of the movie. The solution was to hire professional voice and dramatic actor Peter Marinker to step in and dub Jones's lines. Marinker, whose identity wasn't revealed until decades later, had to study Jones's lip movements and delivery style to create a seamless replacement. According to Jones himself, roughly half of his dialogue in the final film came from Marinker's voice work rather than his own recordings from the set. The dubbing was so extensive and well executed that most audiences never noticed the switch, creating one of cinema's most successful voice replacements. For years, even industry insiders debated who had provided the mystery voice, making it one of the most persistent unsolved puzzles in Hollywood history. Producer's mother-in-law discovery. The casting of Flash Gordon happened in one of the most bizarre ways in Hollywood history, proving that sometimes the most unlikely connections can change an actor's entire career. Sam J. Jones landed the lead role in this multi-million-dollar science fiction epic not through traditional auditions or screen tests, but because producer Dino De Laurentiis' mother-in-law happened to be watching television one afternoon. Ivy Webb, De Laurentiis' mother-in-law, was tuning into an episode of The Dating Game when she spotted Jones as one of the bachelors competing for a date. Something about his appearance and personality caught her attention, and she mentioned him to her son-in-law as someone who might be perfect for the Flash Gordon role they were trying to cast. At the time, De Laurentiis was actively pursuing much bigger names for the part, with established stars like Kurt Russell and Arnold Schwarzenegger both in serious consideration for the role. Russell, who would later become famous as Snake Plissken in Escape from New York, ultimately turned down the part because he felt the character lacked enough personality to make it interesting. Schwarzenegger was also seriously considered, but was rejected because his thick Austrian accent was deemed too difficult to overcome for the all-American hero character. Jones, meanwhile, had very limited acting experience beyond a small supporting role in the romantic comedy 10 from 1979. He was 6 feet tall with the right athletic build for the character, but his resume was nowhere near as impressive as the established actors he was competing against. The recommendation from Webb proved to be the deciding factor, and Jones found himself cast as the lead in one of the most expensive films in cinema history at that time. His entire career trajectory changed because someone's mother-in-law happened to be watching a game show at exactly the right moment and had the connections to make her opinion matter. Dino's Queen confusion. The creation of Flash Gordon's iconic soundtrack almost never happened because producer Dino De Laurentiis had absolutely no idea who Queen was when they were first suggested for the project in 1979. This gap in musical knowledge led to one of the most awkward meetings in rock and film history, and nearly prevented one of cinema's most memorable soundtracks from ever being created. When De Laurentiis was told that Queen had been recruited to write music for his science fiction epic, he reportedly responded with genuine confusion, asking, "Who are the Queens?" The Italian producer, who was used to working with traditional orchestral composers for his films, had never encountered the British rock band despite their growing international fame and success with albums like Bohemian Rhapsody. The situation became even more complicated when De Laurentiis was finally introduced to the band and their theatrical, over-the-top performance style. Rather than being impressed by their musical talents and dramatic flair, the producer initially worried that Queen was too campy and theatrical for the serious space opera he thought he was making. This created significant resistance within the production team about whether to move forward with the rock band or find a more conventional composer. Director Mike Hodges had to work to convince De Laurentiis that Queen's dramatic sensibilities would actually complement the comic book style he was trying to achieve with the film. The band members themselves were eager to take on the project because it offered them a chance to explore new creative territory and contribute to a science fiction mythology that some of them had loved since childhood. The irony of the situation was that Queen's theatrical approach and love of dramatic storytelling made them perfectly suited for Flash Gordon's camp aesthetic, even though De Laurentiis initially saw these same qualities as potential problems that might undermine his film's credibility. Fellini and Leone almost directed Flash. Gordon could have been a completely different movie if either of two legendary Italian directors had taken the helm, as producer Dino De Laurentiis originally wanted Flash Gordon to be an art film rather than the campy space opera it eventually became. Both Federico Fellini and Sergio Leone, directors known for creating some of cinema's most acclaimed masterpieces, were seriously considered to direct the project before Mike Hodges was eventually chosen. Federico Fellini, the visionary director behind classics like 8½" and La Dolce Vita, actually attended early meetings with De Laurentiis about the Flash Gordon project. Fellini had been a lifelong fan of the original comic strip created by Alex Raymond, which made him an appealing choice for the producer who wanted to bring artistic credibility to the science fiction adaptation. However, Fellini ultimately walked away from the project due to scheduling conflicts and creative differences about the direction the film should take. Sergio Leone, the master of spaghetti westerns who created The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and Once Upon a Time in the West, was also approached about directing Flash Gordon. Like Fellini, Leone had genuine affection for the original comic strips and understood their cultural significance. However, after reading the script that had been developed for the project, Leone declined the opportunity because he believed the screenplay was not faithful enough to the original Raymond comic strips that he had grown up reading. Both directors wanted to make a version of Flash Gordon that honored the serious adventure spirit of the original comics rather than the tongue-in-cheek approach that the script was pushing toward. Neither filmmaker was interested in creating a camp version of a property they genuinely loved and respected, which ultimately led De Laurentiis to hire Mike Hodges, who was more willing to embrace the theatrical and humorous elements that became the film's defining characteristics. The giant spider scene disaster. One of the most elaborate and expensive scenes ever created for Flash Gordon never made it into the final movie, despite requiring an entire day of intensive makeup work and creating one of the most bizarre moments in the film's chaotic production history. Melody Anderson, who played Dale Arden, endured 6 grueling hours of makeup and prosthetic application to transform into a giant spider for what was supposed to be a surreal dream sequence. The makeup team painted Anderson's entire body green and fitted her with fake spider eyes and menacing fangs, creating an otherworldly creature that was both fascinating and terrifying. The most challenging part of the transformation was the massive headpiece, which weighed 20 pounds and required Anderson to balance this unwieldy costume piece while trying to perform her scenes. The weight and bulk of the spider headpiece made movement difficult and speaking nearly impossible, but Anderson committed fully to the bizarre transformation. The spider sequence was originally conceived as a dream or nightmare scene, where Dale would appear to Flash in this monstrous form, adding a psychological horror element to the space adventure. The makeup artists and costume designers had spent considerable time and money developing the elaborate spider costume, believing it would create a memorable and unsettling moment in the film. However, when director Mike Hodges arrived on set and saw the completed spider transformation, he immediately realized there was a major problem with the scene. Despite acknowledging that the makeup work was impressive and visually striking, Hodges told the crew, "This is wonderful, but we can't use this. It has absolutely nothing to do with the script." The director's assessment was correct, as the spider scene had somehow been developed without properly connecting to the story that was actually being filmed, resulting in an entire day of expensive production work that contributed nothing to the final movie. Brian Blessed's stunt accident. Brian Blessed brought his legendary theatrical energy to Flash Gordon in ways that both delighted and terrified the production crew, insisting on performing his own stunts despite the obvious dangers involved in playing Prince Voltan, the leader of the Winged Hawkmen. Blessed's commitment to authenticity extended to the complex wire work required for the flying sequences, where actors were suspended high above the studio floor to create the illusion of soaring through the skies of planet Mongo. During one of the early takes for a flying scene, disaster struck when Blessed's safety harness malfunctioned and completely failed while he was suspended in the air. The veteran stage actor, known for his powerful voice and commanding presence, fell from the wire rig without any crash mat positioned below to break his fall. The accident could have resulted in serious injury or worse, but Blessed survived the unexpected drop and continued working on the film despite the frightening experience. The harness failure was just one example of the production's ongoing safety challenges, as the elaborate costumes and special effects often pushed both equipment and performers beyond their limits. Blessed's willingness to keep performing his own stunts after such a dangerous accident demonstrated his dedication to the role and his fearless approach to filmmaking. Beyond the physical dangers, Blessed also created problems for the sound department with his enthusiastic approach to the action scenes. The actor reportedly ruined multiple takes by spontaneously adding his own sound effects during battle sequences, making pew-pew noises while firing prop weapons or during fight scenes. While these improvised sound effects showed Blessed's playful engagement with the material, they created additional work for the film editors who had to either use takes with the unwanted sounds or find alternative footage. Despite these challenges, Blessed's energetic performance became one of the most memorable aspects of Flash Gordon, and his famous line, "Gordon's alive," remains iconic decades later. Sam Jones's hospital fight, Sam J. Jones developed a reputation as a troublemaker during the Flash Gordon production, frequently getting into physical altercations that worried the film's producers and created ongoing headaches for the shooting schedule. The young actor, who had been a Marine before entering show business, seemed unable to avoid confrontations during his time working on the expensive science fiction epic in London. The situation reached a crisis point when Jones failed to show up for filming one day because he had been hospitalized following a particularly violent scuffle that left him with severe facial injuries. The fight had resulted in a massive scrape across his face that required immediate medical attention, threatening to derail the entire production since the leading man's appearance was crucial for maintaining continuity throughout the remaining scenes. When producer Dino De Laurentiis learned that his star was in the hospital with facial damage, he didn't wait for updates or delegate the problem to assistants. Instead, the powerful Italian producer personally stormed into the operating room where Jones was being treated, determined to take direct control of the medical situation that could potentially destroy his multi-million-dollar investment. De Laurentiis confronted the doctors who were working on Jones's injuries, demanding assurances that they could repair the damage to his face without leaving any permanent scars that would be visible on camera. The producer needed to know immediately whether the facial injuries would affect the film's shooting schedule or require expensive reshooting of scenes that had already been completed. This dramatic hospital confrontation highlighted the intense pressure surrounding the Flash Gordon production and the volatile relationship between Jones and De Laurentiis that would eventually lead to the actor's departure from the project before post-production was completed. The incident demonstrated how Jones's offset behavior was creating serious problems that extended far beyond typical production challenges. Scotland. Doubled for America. The opening scenes of Flash Gordon take audiences on a journey that begins much farther from home than most viewers realize, as the airfield sequences that establish the story's American setting were actually filmed thousands of miles away on a remote Scottish island. The production team chose Broadford Airfield on the Isle of Skye in Scotland to represent the United States location where Flash Gordon and Dale Arden's fateful plane journey begins. Broadford Airfield sits in the dramatic Highland landscape of Skye, one of Scotland's most scenic and isolated islands, known for its rugged mountains, ancient castles, and breathtaking coastal views. The airfield itself is a small facility that serves the local community and visiting aircraft. But for Flash Gordon, it became the launching point for an intergalactic adventure that would take the characters to the far reaches of space. The decision to film in Scotland rather than an actual American location was likely driven by practical considerations, as the entire Flash Gordon production was based in the United Kingdom to take advantage of British studios and crew expertise. Using Broadford Airfield allowed the filmmakers to maintain their UK production base, while still creating the atmospheric opening scenes that were crucial for establishing the story's earthbound beginning. The Scottish location provided the right combination of open space, aviation facilities, and dramatic weather that the script required for the scenes where natural disasters begin affecting Earth. The remote island setting also gave the production team the isolation they needed to control filming conditions without interference from crowds or urban distractions. This geographical switch demonstrates how international film productions often use creative location choices to represent different countries, with Scottish Highland scenery successfully standing in for American terrain in a way that audiences accepted without question. Max von Sydow's 70-pound costume. Max von Sydow's portrayal of Ming the Merciless required the legendary Swedish actor to endure one of the most physically demanding costume challenges in science fiction film history, as his elaborate villain outfit weighed over 70 pounds and transformed every scene into a test of endurance. The costume designers had created an incredibly ornate and detailed ensemble that perfectly captured the comic book grandeur of the evil emperor. But the weight of all the materials made it nearly impossible for von Sydow to move naturally or perform for extended periods. The Ming costume included heavy metallic elements, intricate decorative pieces, flowing robes with substantial fabric, and elaborate headgear that all combined to create the crushing weight that von Sydow had to bear. Every component of the outfit was designed to make Ming appear powerful and imposing, but the cumulative effect was a costume so heavy that it severely limited the actor's mobility and threatened his ability to deliver his performance effectively. Von Sydow could only remain standing in the complete Ming costume for a few minutes at a time before the weight became unbearable and he needed to sit down or have assistance removing parts of the outfit. This created significant challenges for the filming schedule, as scenes had to be carefully planned and shot quickly to accommodate the physical limitations imposed by the costume's excessive weight. The production team had to develop special procedures for helping von Sydow into and out of the costume, and scenes were often broken down into very short segments to prevent the actor from becoming exhausted or injured. Despite these difficulties, von Sydow's commanding presence and distinctive voice made his Ming the Merciless one of the most memorable villains in science fiction cinema, proving that great performances can emerge even from the most challenging physical circumstances. Costumes held by duct tape. The stunning visual spectacle that audiences see in Flash Gordon was achieved through an elaborate masquerade of costume maintenance that relied heavily on quick fixes and emergency repairs, as the ornate outfits designed for the film were constantly falling apart during the demanding production schedule. Despite looking magnificent on camera, the elaborate costumes were surprisingly fragile and unreliable, creating ongoing headaches for the costume department and forcing actors to perform in outfits that were literally disintegrating around them. The problems were widespread and persistent throughout filming, with armor pieces cracking under the stress of movement, delicate wing attachments tearing during action sequences, and ornamental helmets breaking apart in the middle of important scenes. The costume designers had prioritized visual impact over durability, creating beautiful but impractical outfits that couldn't withstand the physical demands of a major film production. Rather than stopping production to properly repair or replace the damaged costumes, the crew developed a philosophy of pushing forward no matter what happened to the outfits during filming. Actors were instructed to keep performing even when their costumes were visibly falling apart, with the understanding that creative camera angles and quick editing could hide most of the problems that occurred during shooting. The solution to these constant costume failures became an extensive reliance on duct tape and other emergency repair methods that could be applied quickly between takes or even during scenes. Most of what appears in the final version of Flash Gordon was actually held together by strategically placed duct tape, safety pins, and other makeshift solutions that kept the elaborate outfits functional just long enough to capture the necessary footage. This behind-the-scenes reality required perfect timing from both the actors and the camera operators, who had to work together to complete scenes before the temporary repairs failed and the costumes fell apart completely. Star Wars connection irony. The creation of Star Wars in Flash Gordon represents one of the most ironic twists in Hollywood history, as these two iconic space adventures are connected by a failed business deal that ultimately changed the direction of science fiction cinema forever. In the early 1970s, George Lucas was actively trying to secure the film rights to Flash Gordon because he wanted to create his own version of the classic comic strip that had inspired his love of adventure stories and space opera storytelling. Lucas had grown up reading the original Flash Gordon comic strips created by Alex Raymond and watching the black and white movie serials starring Buster Crabbe from the 1930s and 40s. The young filmmaker saw Flash Gordon as the perfect vehicle for bringing old-fashioned space adventure to modern audiences, and he began pursuing the rights with serious intentions of making it his next major project after American Graffiti. However, Lucas discovered that producer Dino De Laurentiis had already purchased the Flash Gordon rights and was not interested in selling them or collaborating with the aspiring director. Faced with this rejection, Lucas decided to create his own original space adventure story instead, drawing inspiration from the same classic serials and adventure tales that had made Flash Gordon appealing to him in the first place. The result was Star Wars, which became a massive cultural phenomenon and transformed Hollywood's approach to science fiction filmmaking when it was released in 1977. The unexpected success of Lucas's space opera created a wave of demand for similar films, leading studios to rush science fiction projects into production to capitalize on the newfound audience interest in space adventures. Ironically, Flash Gordon eventually reached theaters in 1980 as one of the many films specifically designed to cash in on the Star Wars craze, even though Lucas's original desire to make Flash Gordon had directly led to the creation of the very franchise it was now trying to imitate. Daily script changes chaos. The Flash. Gordon production descended into complete script chaos as dialogue and scenes changed so frequently that the cast eventually abandoned any attempt to memorize their lines or understand the overall story they were supposed to be telling. New script pages arrived on set literally minutes before cameras began rolling, leaving actors scrambling to read their lines for the first time, while makeup artists applied final touches and lighting crews made last-minute adjustments. The constant rewrites created an atmosphere of confusion and frustration among the performers, who found it impossible to develop any sense of character continuity or narrative flow when their dialogue was being altered multiple times throughout each shooting day. What started as normal script revisions quickly escalated into a daily avalanche of changes that made preparation impossible and left everyone working from incomplete information. Eventually, the situation became so unmanageable that the cast collectively decided to stop trying to follow the official script and instead began improvising their way through scenes based on their general understanding of what was supposed to happen. This improvisational approach meant that much of what audiences see in the final film was actually created spontaneously by actors who were making up dialogue and reactions as the cameras rolled. The script confusion was so severe that several cast members later admitted in interviews that they never fully understood what Flash Gordon was actually about. Even after completing their work on the film, they knew their individual character motivations and relationships, but the broader plot and themes remained unclear because the constant changes prevented anyone from seeing a complete, coherent version of the story. This behind-the-scenes chaos paradoxically contributed to the film's unique energy and unpredictable tone, as the actors' genuine confusion and spontaneous reactions created moments of authenticity that might not have emerged from a more carefully planned production process. Football scene, pure improv. One of Flash Gordon's most beloved and memorable sequences was created through pure spontaneous improvisation, as the famous scene where Flash transforms his execution into an American football game had no choreography, no preparation, and no detailed planning before the cameras started rolling. The sequence occurs when Flash is sentenced to death and must face a deadly challenge, but instead of following any predetermined script, the actors simply reacted to each other in the moment and created something entirely unexpected. The scene was supposed to be a straightforward execution sequence, but when filming began, the cast found themselves without clear direction about how the action should unfold or what specific moves they should make. Rather than stopping production to develop a proper plan, everyone involved decided to wing it and see what happened when they started performing without a safety net. Brian Blessed, who played Prince Vultan, took the initiative and began spontaneously calling out actual football plays in the middle of the scene, treating the deadly challenge as if it were a real sporting event. His impromptu play calling gave the other actors something to react to and helped transform what could have been a confusing mess into a coherent and entertaining sequence that made perfect sense within the film's comic book logic. The lack of preparation meant that every reaction, every movement, and every line of dialogue was being created in real time as the cameras captured the action. What could easily have looked completely incoherent instead became one of the most talked about and quotable moments in the entire film, proving that sometimes the best creative solutions emerge from complete chaos. The success of this improvised football sequence demonstrated how the cast's willingness to embrace uncertainty and spontaneity actually enhanced the film's playful energy and unpredictable charm. Queen Elizabeth's alleged fandom, Brian Blessed, made one of the most surprising claims in Flash Gordon history when he revealed that Queen Elizabeth II had personally told him that Flash Gordon was her favorite film, creating an unexpected connection between British royalty and the campy science fiction adventure. According to Blessed, this remarkable conversation took place during one of his encounters with the Queen, though he has never provided specific details about when or where this royal film discussion occurred. The veteran actor claims that Queen Elizabeth specifically mentioned enjoying his famous "Gordon's Alive" line, which became one of the most quoted and recognizable moments from the entire film. Blessed's booming delivery of this phrase has been repeated, sampled, and referenced countless times since the movie's release in 1980. But learning that it caught the attention of the British monarch adds an entirely new dimension to its cultural impact. Even more surprisingly, Blessed has stated that the Queen told him she regularly rewatched Flash Gordon with her grandchildren during holiday gatherings, suggesting that the royal family made the space opera part of their seasonal entertainment traditions. The idea of Queen Elizabeth and her grandchildren enjoying the film's campy dialogue and over-the-top action sequences creates a delightfully unexpected image of royal family movie nights. In more recent years, Blessed has expanded on these claims by stating that the Queen actually named Flash Gordon as her favorite film of all time, elevating this casual royal endorsement to an official royal preference. However, no official confirmation of these claims has ever been issued by Buckingham Palace or other royal representatives, leaving Blessed's stories as unverified but entertaining anecdotes about the film's supposed reach into the highest levels of British society. The claims remain part of Flash Gordon folklore, regardless of their accuracy. Horror comics artist's reaction. Al Williamson's response to the 1980 Flash Gordon film represents one of the most telling reactions from someone who truly understood the character's original spirit as the legendary comic artist who had helped define Flash Gordon's visual identity walked out of the theater in complete silence and refused to discuss the movie for the rest of his life. Williamson had spent years working on Flash Gordon comics and was known for his detailed, elegant, and serious illustrations that captured the adventure and nobility of Alex Raymond's original creation. When the film was being developed, Williamson was hired to illustrate the official comic book adaptation that would be released alongside the movie, which seemed like a perfect match given his extensive experience with the character and his reputation as one of the finest Flash Gordon artists in the medium. However, Williamson's involvement in the comic adaptation gave him an inside view of the numerous script changes and the increasingly campy direction that the film was taking. The artist had grown up reading and later working on Flash Gordon stories that treated the character with respect and dignity, presenting him as a genuine hero in exciting but straightforward adventure tales. When Williamson saw how the film transformed Flash Gordon into a tongue-in-cheek comedy with deliberately exaggerated performances and campy dialogue, he was reportedly deeply disappointed by what he considered a betrayal of the character's legacy. After attending a screening of the completed film, Williamson left the theater without saying a word to anyone about what he had just witnessed. Despite his professional obligation to complete the comic adaptation and his decades of involvement with Flash Gordon, he never publicly commented on the movie or shared his thoughts about how it had interpreted the character he had spent so much time bringing to life in comics.